It's a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to be in Northern Ireland. It's great to be meeting people across your wonderful city. So it's great to be here. For those of you who still have a Nokia phone, God bless you. You're actually a fairly small bunch. As a reminder, though, you might remember that back in 2011, Nokia released the 1100 version or 1100 version, and they sold across the world 250 million units of that particular phone. Nokia at the time, 50% of their profits as an organisation came from phones. In 2008, they were listed as one of the most valuable companies, names across the world. And yet, in less than 10 years, Nokia is now 3% of the mobile phone market. It's 25% of what it used to be in its capital and its influence across the world. So the question is, what happened to Nokia? Well, what happened to Nokia was the iPhone and the Android. What happened to Nokia was it was so enamored with its own success that the world moved on and it didn't change. And the point is that change, as David said, as we introduced, is a really key part of the society in which we live in. And change happens rapidly, and change happens all of the time. So any of us, or any of you, in any part of your life, if you're dealing with an organisation or a group of people, change is the air that we breathe. So the question is, how do you manage change? I know it's probably a bit of a furphy to say you manage change. Most of the time you're just hanging on for the ride, really, aren't you? And if you're in leadership, you try and look like you know what you're doing, but in the end you're not sure that you are. I actually want to give you a little formula, and this is not to say, oh, it's simple, just do these things. Here's a little formula to think about change, and if that clicking still happens, I'll yell at you and we'll turn the microphone off. Here's a formula for change. D times V times F times I is greater than resistance. Don't worry, it's not a test, I'll tell you what this is. Dissatisfaction times vision times first steps times influence is greater than resistance. So I'm not a mathematician, but I'll tell you what I do know. In any mathematical formula, if one of the numbers equals naught, then the outcome is zero. So in other words, what I'm simply saying is, for managing change, for bringing change in the for-profit or the for-purpose sector of the community, for any group of people, I think you need, it's a slight simplification, but a way of thinking about change, you need to find each of these within the organisation that you run. And so what we want to do is actually talk about each of these as we go through, and the first is dissatisfaction. Now, it sounds like a fairly negative place to start, doesn't it? And yet, one of the things that we often miss and fail to understand, but it's completely logical, and that is if you want to bring change, positive change, to any group, or to be frank, we're going to talk about this individually as well, personally, you need a level of dissatisfaction. One of the things that often happens if you're new to an organisation, you get a new role in an organisation, you're leading a company, you're leading a business, or you're leading a for-purpose in that part of the sector of the community, and you come in and you see all the things that need to change. And what we think is what we've not got to do is to sell vision. We need to sell vision to these people. They need to see the future. They need to grasp the future. If I can gather together a brilliant, life-changing vision statement that will grab their attention, they'll all be excited and follow me over the hill into the future. And sometimes we're sadly disappointed that they don't. Now, one of the reasons they don't follow you into vision, because they're not dissatisfied. They're actually quite happy. They don't want to see change. And in fact, one of the things that we have to struggle with if you're in leadership of a group or an organisation or a for-purpose group is that the people in their roles in that organisation actually feel really competent and confident doing what they do. And they don't actually have any dissatisfaction. They're quite comfortable. And what you're asking them is to go from what they know to what they don't know. To go from where they feel comfortable to where they're not sure that they will actually be competent. You're asking them to step into the unknown with you, where they may move from being confident in their ability to not having a great deal of confidence in what they do. I'll put the dissatisfaction up there. Just keep moving on the PowerPoint. I've only got 4 slides, so it's not that hard to move one at a time, is it? What we need to do is to help people gain some dissatisfaction, but also remain confident that they will still exist in whatever the ministry, the company, the group becomes in the future. Now, if you think about this logically and individually, because there's a couple of ways of looking at this morning's subject matter, and that is managing change in an organisation, but it's also about personal change. And if you think about this just in your own head, what makes you change as an individual? Well, mostly it's because you're dissatisfied with something in your life. You know, that you make the mistake of standing on the scales and looking at the outcome of your weight. And often that breeds a certain level of dissatisfaction. You are running late for something, so have to hurry 2 blocks, and you are so out of breath when you get there, you think, I really need to do something about my health. Or you get home one day or one evening and you have a terrible fight with your wife or your husband. And you think, wow, this is not good. Or you have that interaction with your teenage child. Well, actually, any interaction would be helpful with your teenage child, but you have an interaction that doesn't play out very well. And what happens? You have a level of dissatisfaction. You know, mostly that can make us depressed, but often it's the driver for change. Dissatisfaction is the engine room for change. And I want to say to you this morning, if you're here this morning and you have a level of dissatisfaction in your life, and all the men here, they wouldn't have told anybody. The women would have already shared that with 4 of their friends. The men wouldn't have mentioned that to anybody. They all look competent. Look at them. Like you guys all look competent and fabulous and control of life. But many of you have dissatisfaction. And you actually think, I wish I was here feeling totally satisfied in life. I wish I was here feeling on top of everything, but I'm dissatisfied. Guess what? You're in a great spot. You're in a great spot. I don't say that glibly, because you're in a place where change is possible, because you're ready for change. You're looking for it. And actually, one of the things we're going to talk about this morning is personal change that can make a lifetime's difference in your life. And that actually comes out of a place of dissatisfaction that says, I want to be somebody different. There's something more that I can be. And that's what we're trying to get in our organisations. We want them to say, yeah, we can do better than this. And there's a whole bunch of things we can say about that, which I won't. There's a whole bunch of things we can say about how you bring positive dissatisfaction rather than just looking like the new person who's turned up and is negative about everything we've ever done, which is kind of what happens often when you're the new person trying to bring change. The second thing, and I'll remember to put this first, the second thing is vision. Now, this is where we often start, but I'm trying to say to you this morning, this is second. And vision is that picture of a preferable future that we can all hold on to and grasp and understand. You know, vision is a little tiring these days, isn't it? We have local councils in Australia. You know, the local council that you have the state governments, and then you have local councils. Seriously, they have vision statements on their wall. When the local council has a vision statement, we know that's overworked. It's always something about serving the community and caring for people, which they never seem to do anyway, so you wonder why they bother putting it on the wall. We often think in our organisations, if we craft a fabulous vision statement on the wall, we've found vision. No, we're not. We've just got a statement on the wall. We haven't actually found vision. Vision is what captures this sense of people going with you to somewhere better than where they are, and that they're wanting to grasp that with you and move forward with you. And so vision at its best is something that is so tangible. It's almost like so tangible that people can taste it, smell it, touch it, see it, because that's clear, crystal clear vision. This is old, this example, but one of the best. And I was reminded of it because on a plane, I see a few movies on planes. You ever seen a movie on a plane, then go into the movie theatre and watch it? It's like, wow, this looks fantastic. Look at that. It's a lot better than that little tiny picture I was looking at before. One of the movies I've just seen recently is Hidden Figures. If you've seen that, it's a brilliant movie. If you haven't, do yourself a favour and go and watch it. And it's about NASA. And it reminded me of NASA, one of the greatest visions, you know, of the last probably centuries, in the sense of it was a short, clear, understandable vision was JFK, we want to put a man on the moon. Like, is there anything clearer than that? And there's a story told about John F. Kennedy going out to the NASA and walking around NASA as they're trying to put a man on the moon. And he's walking around and he meets a cleaner who's just a janitor working within the NASA establishment. And he stopped him in the corridor and said, "Oh, what do you do here? You know, they're just doing the political thing. What are you doing here? What's your job here?" And he looked up at JFK and said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." Like, isn't that vision? Isn't that vision? The vision is, I'm not a janitor. I'm helping put a man on the moon. That's my job. And if you're in a business, a company, or a for-purpose organisation, that's what you want. You want people to understand what the future looks like. But next, and I've not spent a lot of time on that because we all get that, but the next thing we need is first steps. In other words, what are you going to do to go towards that vision? What is the next step? What is the next thing that you will do? I'm going to turn this off because I don't know about you, but that crackling is really annoying me. So you're probably fine. The question is, what's the next thing you will do? What's the next step? What's the first step? And you know what, often in leaders, in organisations, we're great at often picking the things that are not so good. We're often good at pointing out where the organisation's failing. We're often good at drawing the big picture, the kind of putting the person on the moon sort of idea of what's the next hill we're going to go over. The question is, what will you do tomorrow? What will change? Because if you don't change the way you function or act, or in your values or your communication or what's happening, you're not going to get a different outcome. And there's a great danger in actually creating dissatisfaction and drawing a wonderful picture for the future. There's a huge danger in that. Have you ever thought about that? The danger is you go to an organisation, let's say you're the new CEO of an organisation, you wander in, the new manager, the new person in charge, and you are brilliant at creating dissatisfaction. So you've taken a group of people who are basically happy and you've made them dissatisfied. Good on you. And you've picked a great vision for the future. You've pitched it. You've been so good that they've bought it. You now have taken a group of people who are very happy, muddling along in their life, doing what they were doing, and you've made them dissatisfied and you've drawn a great picture for the future. If in a year's time nothing has changed, you are in a lot of trouble. Think about it. You now have a dissatisfied group of people with a fabulous expectation of what the future is going to look like. And if you don't deliver first steps, if you don't deliver how you're going to get there, somehow you're in a lot of trouble in your ability to move forward. And in that process, what you need to do is work out what's systematic change and what's symbolic change. Rudy Giuliani wrote a book called Leadership. The first and the last chapters are brilliant. The bit in the middle is not bad. You know, Giuliani was the mayor of New York and certainly was the mayor of New York through the 9/11 attack. One of the things that Giuliani did was to help change New York from being a capital of crime in America and murders to, if you go to New York today, a very safe place to walk around. And you feel safe when you walk around there. Those who've been there will know that. And what did he change? Well, there was all sorts of systematic things that he changed. But you know, one of the things he did right up front is he made 3 symbolic changes the day he became mayor. No train would leave the yards with graffiti on it. Every taxi driver would wear a collared shirt. All the squeegee guys, you know, the guys that wash windows, were taken off the streets. And you're probably thinking, seriously? Like, does that matter? What difference is that really going to make to the fabric in New York? Well, the point was, it made all the difference in people's minds because they saw change. Never underestimate the power of symbol and symbolic change. But lastly, and this is really important, is influence. So the interesting thing about the 3 I've just talked about dissatisfaction and about vision and about first steps, is that will get people's heads and their hands, but it may not get their hearts. What gets people's hearts is influence. And what is influence is you as a person and your character and who you are. Have you ever thought about the question of who's the most influential person that's ever lived? If you haven't, there's a couple of Americans that actually ask that question. They happen to be computer scientists. They wrote a book that was released 2 years ago called Who's Bigger? By the way, the first chapter is quite interesting. The rest is boring as all get out because they explain as computer scientists how they did their work, and that's as dull as dull. You just dull. But interestingly, so they're looking at a large data set of Wikipedia and asking, what does this tell us about the most influential person in the world? Which sounds sort of odd, but it works very well. And what they did was they listed the top few thousand, they got to the top 100, they listed the top 10, and the most influential person in human history from their study, and then they looked at other studies to show the same, was Jesus of Nazareth. Now we kind of go, well, yeah, we know there's a church across the world. Of course Jesus is the most influential person, but it's kind of odd really, because Jesus didn't travel very far, didn't speak to many people, owned no land, wrote no books, owned no property, started no organisations, and yet now he's the most influential person in human history. Why did that happen? Because Jesus captured people's hearts. Because Jesus came into the world to give himself to all of humanity. And the interesting thing is that people's lives are changed and influenced by what Jesus, who he is and what he has done. The most influential person bringing change to the globe was someone who captured people's hearts because he was God in this world. And the intriguing thing about Jesus is he actually changes, he creates dissatisfaction in people, he gives people vision for the future, there's a demonstration of the first steps, and as they are changed, the world is changed. My own family, my own story is that my dad went to Australia, I'm on the other side of the world, went to Australia from Germany in his mid-20s. As a very young kid, he lived through the Second World War. You can't imagine what that must have been like. His dad left at 2. He doesn't know whatever happened to his dad, whether he died in the war or just left the family. So his background has no faith background, no religious background, dysfunctional family, comes to Australia, marries my mum who was a fairly active Anglican, moves to the country to work on a farm. He was sponsored to Australia from Germany to work on a farm. You could have written what he knew about farming on the back of a postage stamp with a blunt crayon. I have no idea what he was doing on a farm, but he apparently got reasonably good at it. My mum, growing up as an Anglican, goes off to the little church, tiny little church. I've spoken there. 50 people would be a crowd in this church. And there was a young pastor, his name was Alan Robinson. He was sent out there to speak in this local church. And he was a believer that Jesus is a person of influence. And so he talked about Jesus changing the world. And my dad's life was changed in those conversations. And that changed my life. When I was 2, he came to faith in Jesus, changed his life radically. Totally revolutionised his world. When I was just 11, I made a choice to follow Jesus personally, and that's where I've been ever since. But how did that happen? The influence of the person of Jesus. And the intriguing thing is that sometimes we can talk about Jesus, and we've just done a series that we're talking about. That's why we're here in Belfast talking about a series that we released called Jesus the Game Changer, how the life and teaching of Jesus changed the world and why it matters. And one of the things that we look at is some of the major shifts across the world that Jesus brought. And that can actually lead to a false way of thinking about Jesus' influence. Because what we can think is that Jesus came to make huge sociological shifts in the world. He didn't actually. Jesus changed one person at a time, and they changed the world. And I think about one of the people we looked at in the series is William Wilberforce, just this powerful, powerful story. And you would know William Wilberforce well. If you don't, pretend you do, you should. You know that he stood against slavery and changed the world. And some of you would know that he went to London, to Westminster as a 21-year-old, as a member for Hull. He wasn't a person of faith. He went through Cambridge University and was a party boy through the whole time, spent his time playing cards and carousing and spending nights out all over the place. He was just a party boy, loved life, but he was brilliant. Ends up in Westminster. He's just the best mate of William Pitt, who becomes the Prime Minister. William Pitt's dad is the Prime Minister. He's connected. It's all ahead of him. Till he goes on holidays with a guy called Isaac Milner. They travel across Europe, and when they're traveling across Europe, Isaac Milner talked to him about the influence of Jesus, and it changed William Wilberforce's life. And he comes back to England as a follower of Jesus, And guess what he is? He is totally dissatisfied. Now you're probably thinking, hang on, that's wrong, Karl. He's supposed to be, feeling great that he's now a follower of Jesus. No, he's totally dissatisfied because he feels like he's wasted his life. He goes to see John Newton, the guy that wrote the hymn Amazing Grace. They have a conversation. He says, John Newton, now that I've become a Christian, should I give up being a politician and become an Anglican minister, a Church of England minister like you? And John Newton said, no, you're in the right place. And when he left, he went from being dissatisfied, that dissatisfaction, to a place of vision. And his vision was two great things, not one. Two great passions, two great visions that he would do in England. His vision was the abolition of slavery, and secondly was the reformation of manners. Now that wasn't how you use cutlery on your table. It was the reformation of the morals of England. And what did he do with that? There was the first steps, and there's too many first steps to mention. But one of them was a group of people in Clapham who became his friends, and they supported him in everything he did. Dissatisfaction, vision, first steps. But what was the I? Well, the I was, the influence, was his influence within the English society. But when you back up a bit and go back to the beginning of the story, you know what you've got? The influence of Jesus. And the influence of Jesus changed his life, and he changed the world. And as I go back to the beginning when I was talking about our own personal dissatisfaction, nothing changes. That the influence of Jesus is still there for every one of us. The opportunity to have our lives changed and revolutionized and rebuilt out of dissatisfaction to a relationship with God. Jesus is the most influential person in human history, not because he just had brilliant ideas and brilliant teaching, he was a great moral teacher, which he was all of those things. It was because he changed people one at a time. And I want to be bold enough to say, and because I'm the visitor I can, bold enough to say, Jesus wants to change you. He wants to come into your life. We were created to live in a relationship with God. And that's my absolute conviction. And part of the vision of Olive Tree Media, the vision that Jane and I have, is that we want to tell people anywhere across the world, when given the opportunity, that Jesus wants to speak into your life and make you a new person. And it starts by recognizing that we're far from God. It starts by recognizing that dissatisfaction in our lives is our distance from God, and the fact that we're living not in the way we were intended to live. We were created to live in a relationship with God, and if we don't, that's a broken relationship which is going to break us. And so the dissatisfaction each of us feel is actually something that we should feel, because we're not living the way we ought to be, and we're not perfect people, and we don't have it all together. But God comes and says, in the person of Jesus, I have the opportunity to make it right. You can just respond to God, asking Christ into your life to say, I want a fresh start, I want to start again. I want to walk with God in the future. I want the influence of Jesus to influence me. I want to change my organisation. I hope you do. I hope the places that you work, the places that you're involved, your family, your community would be different places because you're a different person. But nothing's going to change unless you change. And the influence of Jesus is what I want to talk about and want to encourage you in this morning. It might sound a bit bold to some of you and a bit odd to others of you, but I want to give an opportunity for us to pray. And in a moment, I'm going to pray a really simple prayer. You don't have to say it out aloud. You don't have to stand up. You don't have to put your hand up. You won't have to do anything. All you have to do is speak to God in these words. And they're a form that says, I want Jesus to come into my life. I want to be a new person. I want to be rebuilt, remade, and I want to walk with Jesus in my life. And if you would like that, because out of your dissatisfaction, you know that your future is built not on you trying harder, but the influence of Jesus in your life. If you know that's true, why don't you pray with me right now? So can we be an attitude of prayer, which just means just close your eyes. I know it's odd, we don't do that a lot, but it just helps us to focus and concentrate. It's not actually any more spiritual, but actually just helps you to concentrate. And if you are in that place that you want to respond to Jesus personally, to make a step of making your life right with God, why don't you pray with me? As I said, not out aloud. This is between you and your Heavenly Father. Why don't you pray this prayer? Lord, I come to you today. I'm dissatisfied with how I lived, and I want a new start. Jesus, I want to say I'm sorry for ignoring you. I want to invite you into my life. I want to be a person that follows Jesus every day. Amen. Can I just pray for us all as we're in an attitude of prayer? Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to be together. We thank you for Jesus' life, death and resurrection and the opportunity for us to live in a relationship with him. Lord, I pray for us in our leadership roles that we'd be those who'd be able to manage change and bring change to make our organisations and the world in which we live a better place. We also pray that we'd be those who live under the power and influence of Jesus Christ. Amen.